In my left hand, I held a slip of paper worth $400 million. In my right hand, I held my phone, pressing it to my ear as I stood in the freezing kitchen of my row house in Philadelphia. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and biting, the kind of cold that settles in your bones and refuses to leave. My son, Michael, answered on the third ring. His voice was a boardroom whisper, impatient and clipped. I told him the lie I had prepared. I told him my sugar levels were spiking dangerously high. I told him my insurance had lapsed and I needed $240 for emergency insulin. I told him I was scared. There was a pause on the line, but it wasn't the pause of a concerned son calculating how fast he could get to me. It was the pause of a man annoyed by a recurring expense. He sighed, a heavy, theatrical sound. He told me he was in the middle of a seed round. He told me I needed to stop managing my finances like a child. Then he delivered the line that would cost him everything. "Sell your wedding ring, Mom. I am not your ATM." The line went dead. I lowered the phone. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just looked down at the lottery ticket in my left hand, the one I had bought 3 days ago. The numbers were right there in black and white. $400 million. I looked at the silence on my phone screen. Then I looked back at the ticket. The test had begun. Before I tell you what I did next, drop a comment below and let me know where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I also want to wish every single one of you a powerful, prosperous, and justice-filled 2026. Let's make this the year we stop accepting less than we deserve. And if you enjoy these stories of justice, please support the channel so we can keep bringing them to you. I sat down at my kitchen table, the wood worn smooth from 30 years of family dinners that no longer happened. I placed the lottery ticket in the center of the table, next to a stack of unpaid bills. For the first time in decades, I didn't see a miracle. I saw a balance sheet. I closed my eyes and let the history wash over me, not as memories, but as line items. I had spent 40 years as an emergency room nurse. I knew the smell of antiseptic and old blood better than the smell of perfume. I knew the specific, grinding ache of standing on concrete floors for 12 hours straight, the way your veins swell and throb until they feel like they might burst. I did that double shift after double shift, year after year, not for myself, but for them. I thought about Michael. 15 years ago, he came to me with a pitch deck and a desperate smile. He needed seed money for his first tech startup. He said he was going to change the world. I liquidated $50,000 from my pension. It was money I had saved for a retirement cottage, money I had traded my health for. He took it, launched his company, and became a millionaire on paper. He paid back the bank loans. He paid back the venture capitalists. He never paid back his mother. When I mentioned it once, 5 years ago, he laughed and said family doesn't charge interest. He didn't just not pay interest. He didn't pay the principal. Then there was Jennifer. My daughter, the lifestyle influencer. She needed to maintain an image. She needed the right clothes, the right apartment, the right trips to Tulum and Bali to build her brand. I put $20,000 of credit card debt in my name to fund her aesthetic. I paid the minimums every month while she posted photos of champagne brunches I wasn't invited to. I drove a 12-year-old sedan with a heater that didn't work so she could lease a luxury SUV. I convinced myself this was what mothers did. We were the soil, and they were the flowers. We were supposed to be buried so they could bloom. But as I sat there in the cold, staring at the ticket that changed everything, I realized the truth. It wasn't love. It was normalized cruelty. Over the years, a subtle shift had occurred. They stopped seeing me as a person with needs, fears, and a breaking point. I had become a utility to them, like a refrigerator or a washing machine. As long as I was working, as long as I was dispensing money and service, I was ignored. But the moment I stopped functioning, the moment I asked for maintenance, they didn't feel concern. They felt annoyance. They looked at me the way you look at a broken appliance that is taking up space. Why won't it work? Why is it making that noise? Why do I have to deal with this? Michael hadn't told me to sell my ring because he was cruel. He said it because he felt entitled to a mother who solved problems, not one who created them. I had audited my life, and I realized I was in the red. It was time to close the account. I picked up my phone again, 1 down, 2 to go. I cleared the call history on my phone, erasing Michael's rejection, as if wiping a smudge from a mirror. Then I dialed Jennifer. My daughter answered on the second ring, but she wasn't speaking to me. I heard her voice, pitched an octave higher than normal, bright and bubbly and completely fake. She was saying something about unboxing the season's absolute must-have. I realized she was live streaming. I was interrupting a broadcast to thousands of strangers. When she finally acknowledged me, her voice dropped to a harsh whisper, the kind you use when you are trying not to wake a baby, or in her case, break a persona. She asked what I wanted. I told her the same lie. I need $240 for insulin. I told her I was dizzy. In the background, I could hear the crinkle of tissue paper as she unwrapped a handbag that cost $3,000 more than I lived on in 2 months. She didn't ask if I was safe. She didn't ask if I had food. She hissed into the receiver. Mom, you are ruining my aesthetic. I am in the middle of a brand deal. Figure it out yourself or call Michael. I can't deal with your drama right now. Then she hung up. The silence that filled my kitchen was heavier this time. It wasn't just rejection, it was replacement. She had replaced a mother with an audience. I had one number left, my grandson, Jacob. He was 22, in his second year of medical school, working nights as an EMT to pay his rent. He answered on the first ring. His voice was thick with exhaustion, the sound of someone who hadn't slept in 20 hours. I asked him for the money. I barely got the words out before he stopped me. He didn't ask why I didn't have it. He didn't ask why his uncle or mother hadn't helped. He just asked if I was alone. I said yes. He told me to sit down and drink water. He said he was 40 minutes away. He arrived in 35. He walked through my door, still wearing his EMT uniform, smelling of diesel and rain. He didn't look at the lottery ticket on the table. He went straight to the refrigerator to check for food. Then he knelt beside my chair and took my pulse. Once he was satisfied I wasn't dying, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of cash. It wasn't a neat stack of hundreds. It was a messy roll of 20s, 10s, and 5s. $600. I asked him where he got it. He looked away, embarrassed. He told me he sold his textbooks for the next semester and pawned the watch I had given him for his high school graduation. He said he could share books with a friend. He said the watch didn't matter. He pressed the money into my hand and told me he was sorry it wasn't more. I looked at his tired eyes, the dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. He had nothing. And he gave me everything. The others had everything, and they gave me nothing. The ledger was complete. It was time to balance the books. I spent the next 3 days in a fog of logistics and secrecy. I met with a high-end estate attorney in a glass tower downtown, a man whose hourly rate could have fed me for a month. We set up a blind trust. I named it the Night Shift Trust. No one would know the beneficiary was a 65-year-old retired nurse unless I wanted them to. Once the money hit the account, $400 million reduced to a still staggering $236 million after taxes. I made my first move. I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't book a cruise. I contacted the dean of Jacob's medical school and paid off his entire tuition balance anonymously. Then I went to a dealership and bought a brand new, reliable pickup truck. Nothing flashy, just solid steel and 4-wheel drive, something that would get him to his shifts safely in the snow. I had it delivered to his apartment with a note that simply said, "For the road ahead." It didn't take long for the wolves to smell something different in the air. 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, Michael's luxury sedan pulled into my driveway, followed closely by Jennifer's SUV. They had seen the truck parked outside Jacob's place. They had heard he was debt-free. They didn't come to congratulate him. They came to interrogate me. They stormed into my kitchen without knocking, bringing a gust of freezing air with them. Michael was already shouting before the door closed. He asked what I had done. He asked if I had taken out a predatory loan. He asked if I was going senile. Jennifer was pacing, her heels clicking aggressively on my linoleum. She said I was being reckless. She said I was spending their inheritance on a kid who should be pulling his own weight. I stood by the sink, watching them. They looked like strangers. Michael, in his bespoke suit, talking about fiduciary irresponsibility and asset protection. Jennifer, with her perfect hair, talking about how embarrassing it would be if I ended up destitute. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the money they felt entitled to, the money they had already spent in their heads. Michael crossed a line I didn't know existed. He lowered his voice to that patronizing, dangerous tone. He said maybe it was time to look into power of attorney. He said if I was making financial decisions like this, maybe I wasn't competent to live alone anymore. He threatened to put me in a home to protect me from myself. He was threatening to lock me away to save a few dollars for himself. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized he wasn't my son anymore. He was a liability, and I was about to liquidate him. I didn't argue. I didn't shout back. I simply nodded and said, "You're right. We need to talk about finances. Come for dinner tonight. Bring everyone." They looked surprised by my capitulation. But the promise of a resolution and likely a check was enough to quiet them. They left, smug in the belief that they had bullied me into submission once again. That evening, the house smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, a scent designed to disarm. Michael, Jennifer, and Jacob arrived promptly at 7. The table was set, but not with china. In the center, where the centerpiece should have been, sat a tattered, spiral-bound notebook. I had kept it for 30 years. It was my ledger. We ate in relative silence, the air thick with anticipation. When the plates were cleared, Michael leaned back, checking his watch. He started talking about trust funds and asset management. I held up a hand. Before we discuss the future, I said, "We need to audit the past." I opened the notebook. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded in places, but the numbers were clear. I began to read. August 1998. Michael's tuition deposit, $2,000, shift differential pay. I turned the page. June 2004. Jennifer's modeling portfolio, $800. Overtime pay. I continued, my voice steady, listing every loan, every bailout, every emergency fund I had provided. The room grew suffocatingly quiet. I read the entry for Michael's startup seed money. I read the entry for Jennifer's credit card consolidation. I read until the final entry. Tuesday. Insulin request. Rejected. I closed the book. Total investment, I said, looking at each of them. $176,400. Return on investment, 0. Michael started to sputter, his face flushing red. "Mom, you can't be serious. That's parenting." "No," I corrected him. "Parenting is raising you to be decent. This was enabling." I nodded to Jacob. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the lottery ticket, placing it gently on top of the ledger. $400 million, I said. "And you didn't even qualify for the price of insulin." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of a world ending. They stared at the ticket, then at me, the realization crashing down on them like a physical weight. The power in the room didn't just shift. It evaporated from them and settled, heavy and cold, on me. The begging began almost immediately. It was pathetic, really. Michael was the first to stammer, his arrogance dissolving into a puddle of excuses. He said he didn't know I was struggling. He said he thought I was exaggerating about the insulin. He said if he had known the stakes were life and death, he would have helped. Jennifer was crying, actual tears this time, talking about how stressed she had been, how the unboxing video was just work pressure, how she loved me. They were trying to rewrite history in real time, trying to erase the cruelty of Tuesday with the desperation of Saturday. I let them talk for a minute, watching them squirm under the weight of $400 million they couldn't touch. Then I reached under the table and pulled out a thick, manila envelope. "You say you didn't know," I said, cutting through Jennifer's sobbing. But the truth is, you didn't care to look. So I did some looking for you. I slid the papers out. This morning, my trust purchased a portfolio of distressed debts from your creditors. I bought your business loans, Michael. I bought your credit card debt, Jennifer. I own the paper on your leased SUV. I am your creditor now. Michael went pale, but he tried to rally. He tried to put on his CEO face. Okay, Mom. That's actually smart. Keep the interest in the family. We can work out a payment plan. It's good business. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. You want to talk about business, Michael? Let's talk about this document. I held up a specific loan agreement, dated 4 years ago. It was a high-risk bridge loan he had taken out to float his company during a rough patch. He had asked me to sign some standard paperwork as a character witness, or so he said. I pointed to a line at the bottom of page 3. Line 4, I said. Collateral. I read the address aloud. It was the address of the house we were sitting in. My house. The home I had paid off with 40 years of blood and sweat. He had put my roof up as collateral for his ego. You didn't just borrow from me, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. You gambled my home. You bet my shelter on your ability to play CEO. And you were defaulting. If I hadn't bought this debt today, the bank would have foreclosed on me next month. I didn't just buy your debt to teach you a lesson. I bought it to save myself from my own son. Michael stared at the paper, his mouth opening and closing. I saw the light leave his eyes. It wasn't just fear. It was the total collapse of his self-image. You aren't a genius founder, Michael, I told him, delivering the final blow. You aren't a titan of industry. You are a bad investment. You are a fraud who used his mother's survival as a safety net. You walk around in $1,000 suits, acting like you built an empire, but you're just a child playing dress-up with money you stole from me. And today, the bank is closed. The silence in the dining room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, a sound that used to comfort me. But now just marked time. Michael was still staring at the loan document, his hand trembling slightly. Jennifer had stopped crying. She was just staring at me with wide, terrified eyes, realizing that her tears, usually her most effective currency, were now worthless. I didn't let them recover. I didn't give them space to formulate a new manipulation. I stood up, smoothing the front of my cardigan. I am calling the loans due, I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Effective immediately. I have instructed my attorneys to seize collateral. Michael looked up, confusion warring with panic. Collateral? What collateral? Your car. Michael. The Tesla. It's parked in my driveway. It's mine now. And Jennifer, your studio equipment, the cameras, the lights, the laptop I bought you 3 Christmases ago? My team is already at your apartment with a court order. You can't do that! Jennifer shrieked, finding her voice. That's my livelihood. It was a hobby funded by my retirement, I corrected her. And now it's liquidated assets. I looked at both of them. You wanted a transaction? You wanted a relationship based on what could be extracted? You got one. I'm not your mother anymore. I'm your bank. And this bank has 0 tolerance for bad debt. I pointed to the door. Get out. Walk to the corner and call a cab. You aren't driving out of here. They didn't move at first. They looked at me, waiting for the punchline, waiting for me to crack, to hug them and say it was all a lesson and everything would be okay. But I just stood there, the ledger closed on the table between us. Finally, Michael stood up. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, stripped of his arrogance, just a middle-aged man in a suit he couldn't afford. He walked out without a word. Jennifer followed him, sobbing quietly into her hands. I watched them go through the front window. I watched them walk down the driveway past Jacob's new truck, their breath clouding in the cold night air, 2 people who had everything and lost it because they couldn't spare $200. 6 months later, I was sitting on a balcony in Tuscany, drinking coffee that cost €5 and tasting every cent of it. The air smelled of cypress and sun-warmed stone. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a notification from my bank. The monthly repayment transfer from Michael had cleared. $300. It was a drop in the ocean of his debt, but he was paying it. He was working as a mid-level manager in a logistics firm, a job he hated but needed. Jennifer was working retail, rebuilding her life without the safety net of my credit. They were angry. I knew. They probably hated me, but for the first time in their lives, they were earning their own way. They were learning the value of $1 because they had to. I opened my email. There was a message from Jacob. He had attached a photo of his grades, top of his class, and a picture of him in his white coat. He was tired, but happy. He was going to be an incredible doctor. Below his email was a report from the Patricia Hayes Foundation for Nursing Resilience. We had just awarded our first round of grants to 20 exhausted, overworked nurses, paying off their debts so they could breathe again. I closed my laptop and looked out at the rolling hills. I used to think my job was to be the soil, to be buried so my children could grow. But I realized that was wrong. A gardener doesn't just let weeds choke out the flowers because they share the same blood. A gardener prunes. A gardener protects. And sometimes, a gardener has to burn the field to save the harvest. I had pruned the dead weight from my life, and in doing so, I had made room for something new to grow. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a sower. And for the first time in 65 years, I was blooming. If you believe that loyalty is worth more than gold, share this story. Let's remind the world that you reap exactly what you sow.